Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the show about building a healthier relationship with modern technology. Now, here are your hosts, R. Blank and Stephanie Warner.
Bethany Sonefeld is the founder of Create with Conscience, a space dedicated to educating and committing to building healthier technology. Create with Conscience was something Bethany developed out of interest in creating a healthier balance of technology in her own life. Bethany is a design manager at Duo Security and was previously at Cloudflare, RetailMeNot, and IBM. Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, Bethany.
Thanks, y'all. I'm so excited to be here with you two.
So just random guess, you're Texan?
Well, I call myself an adopted Texan because I am actually from Michigan originally, but I've been in Texas going on 8 years. So,
Oh, wow.
Cool. Yes.
So here's the most pressing question that we have for you today. What kind of dog is Oakley?
Oakley, oh gosh. She is a mix of a bunch of different breeds. I was a crazy dog mom and did one of the DNA tests for her.
Okay.
And it came back. She's part Chow Chow, part Border Collie, and part, what was the third one? I can't remember, but it was like a whole bunch of different percentages. But she's like got this black fluffy coat and just this really cute, like Rottweiler looking face.
No, she's adorable, and her sunglasses are adorable.
Yeah,
as well.
The sunglasses. We will put the image up in the show notes so everyone can enjoy.
Good. She'll love that.
So you founded Create with Conscience, which I mentioned in the intro, out of an interest in creating healthier balance with technology in your own life as a creator and a consumer. So a couple of questions on that. First is, how would you describe Create with Conscience? What is it? What kind of project is it?
Yeah, great question. So right now, the state that it's in, it is a space that can hopefully empower creators. And I call them creators because I don't want to say designers or engineers or product managers. So creators are anyone working in the tech space. It is there to help empower people to build healthier technology, whatever that might look like in their organization. I like to keep it pretty broad to start out, just so that there are guidelines and principles to follow and research that I've shared with folks that can hopefully help people gain an understanding of why this is important and how to get started with implementing something like this in your everyday life, like you mentioned, as a consumer and as someone that's creating this technology.
So, and this is part of what I find so interesting. I mean, what the issues you're talking about, because we talk about a lot of them on the show and in our community, but they're growing in awareness and acceptance, but they're still, not dominant. And in particular, I don't often encounter people with these views and opinions from within the tech world. So what started you? I mean, I know this comes from your own personal experience, but a little more detail. What started you on this journey and thinking even in these terms with this kind of language?
So you're right. It started with a personal problem that I wanted to create a healthier balance with technology in my own life. I found myself on my device all the time, spending hours on Instagram, and it wasn't making me feel great. And so I started researching Tristan Harris's work. I call him like the godfather of ethical design and tech. He founded the Center for Humane Technology. And some folks may know him from The Social Dilemma on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And it was really his work that inspired me to think about, in order to make change, it really has to start with the people that are creating these products. Because as much as we as consumers can try to build healthier boundaries with tech in our own lives, you have 1,000 engineers on the other side of the platform working against you, working to build algorithms that are designed on purpose to be addictive and to meet business goals, which oftentimes are focused around user engagement. And so for me, it was, gosh, my ethical values, I can't continue along being a product designer and building products in a way that is not catered towards the health of our end users, because in some way, shape, or form, we all are end users of some product.
Yeah. And so you talked about yourself as from your individual perspective as a creator. What can individual contributors working in the tech sector do with the community and the tools and the resources that you are building at Create with Conscience?
Yeah, I think it starts with just educating yourself on best practices and around, what has been done that's deemed unethical or unhealthy. And that's kind of a weird balance to ride right now because it's very opinion based and there are no regulations around tech as it stands today, not yet at least. So I would say it starts with just educating yourself on how you use products and technology and taking stock of how it makes you feel. And then in order to actually implement change in your organization and start these conversations around that, I like to encourage folks to just build a set of values or a playbook of sorts. And that can start, it doesn't have to be, you working all on your own. You can pull from some of your organizational values. So for example, the company that I work for, one of our values is being kinder than necessary. And I think that goes a long way in terms of, well, if we're building products and we want to create a healthy balance with our users and the amount of time they spend on using our products, building kinder or being kinder than necessary is step one in that journey. So it doesn't have to be this cumbersome process of, creating an ethical document per se, but I think it just starts with asking the right questions to your product team and to the people that you're working with. Is this the right decision for our end users? Or is this a decision that's rooted in what the business needs?
Great. I love that. I love being kinder than necessary. That's what a great goal for everybody, even just, regular people who aren't necessarily creators. But I wanted to take a little step backwards and talk a little bit more about what a creator would find on Create with Conscious. Like what is it exactly? What kind of tools and how are you amplifying and influencing the conversation?
Yeah, great question. So Create with Conscience right now offers a set of principles that can hopefully guide folks to building healthier technology. So you'll find the first principle is building in healthy boundaries. And that can look like having a snooze option. Bumble, the dating app, does this where they give users the opportunity to step away from the platform if they need some time away. So thinking through how do we build in healthy digital well-being experiences into our own products. That's principle number one. Number two is on the flip side, anticipating what sort of unhealthy behaviors your end users might be going through and how might they use your own product to potentially harm themselves. So I think a lot of times what I've seen working in tech is we tend to focus on the happy paths and what happens when our users love using our product and everything works out great. But that's not the reality of who we are as human beings. We are complex people. We go through extremely complex emotions like addiction and depression, and exclusion is one of them as well, where a lot of products, unfortunately, exclude certain groups of folks and they weren't meant to be used in that way, but humans have taken them into their own hands. And unfortunately, that's kind of the nasty side of tech. So digging deep into what are these unhealthy behaviors and let's have a conversation about them. Let's talk openly and making sure that we're elevating that into our product development life cycle. So that's principle number two. And then the last principle is empowering change. So this is what I was touching on earlier about it's great that we have these sets of principles, but how do we put them into practice? How do we match, our business goals with creating something that's healthy for our end users? And unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all. Like I don't have an easy answer for how to do that other than just continuing to have these hard conversations and continuing to push the boundaries of what it is that we're building. Because I think that creators have gotten less creative in terms of, for example, people say all the time, Instagram is copying TikTok, and we don't see any sort of new patterns from a design perspective as much anymore. because we have the system that we can pull from.
Yeah,
So
we
it's
have what
really about,
works.
yeah, exactly. Yes, we have, proven that push notifications get users to open your app. And so it's like creators aren't really pushing the boundaries of the technology we have anymore because we have this set of default things that we know that work. So it's just really like having those hard conversations and challenging each other to think outside of the box.
So I've spent some time digging through your site and also watched this video of yours from I think it was the Figma conference, and it's really fantastic. And we'll put links to both of those things in the show notes. And so there's a lot that I want to cover. I'm sure we won't get to all of it, and I feel like I'm probably going to be jumping all over the place. But you were just talking about boundaries, and it reminds me when I was going through your site, you talked about one of the boundaries being all caught up. And I remember just the feeling of reading those words. It was like this Pavlovian trigger of relief. That because I immediately associated that feeling because I've seen that notification in I can't remember which apps because it's in a bunch, but that one when you're all caught up, you're like like you get this palpable sense of visceral relief. Before we move on, can you talk a little bit about all caught up and how that factors into your set of boundaries?
Definitely. So we know that people are spending lots and lots of time on social media. So I think given that knowledge, the all caught up design, my assumption is it was built to help users have that sense of, oh, okay, there's nothing else for me to see here because I've already read everything in my feed, right? So it's building in these, I call them checkpoints, moments where you create a space for the user to pause and think about what they want to do next versus an app like Twitter operates off of infinite scroll. So there was a study that was done that found that if you implement infinite scroll on any sort of platform, your users will spend about 50% more time on that app, which is great for Twitter, right? They want users, interacting on the platform. But I think there's a balance there where it's like you can still build in healthy boundaries and have moments of pause, and your users may very well just continue to scroll, but you're giving them a choice. And I think that's the most important thing about that.
So yeah, I'm not a big user of social media, but I am of Netflix, and so I guess the equivalent there would be when an episode ends and it automatically goes to the next one, versus when it stops and says, "Are you still watching this?" And you have that opportunity to break the endless cycle of sitting on your couch and watching TV. So
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, right, a lot of what you talk about kind of fits into this perspective of control, right? So who is in control? Is it you that's in control, or is it your technology that's in control? Can you speak a little bit about what you mean by control in this context and how it influences Create with Conscience?
Definitely. So I think that a lot of products, unfortunately, have taken away the choice for users. I have seen, I think on YouTube, they've now implemented it where you can disable autoplay, but it's hidden, it's hard to find. The products that we're using, unfortunately, many of them have been designed to be manipulative and to control our time because they know how to do that through certain patterns in the UI. And so the goal with Create with Conscience is to enable creators to give back control to your end users. And that can look different across different sectors that you're working in. I'm working in cybersecurity currently. And so while I have a lot of strong thoughts on social media, it differs from what, it might look like at my own organization. So it's really, I think, just giving back the choice to your users and building in opportunities for them to make a decision that's going to be best for their own personal life.
Great. That actually leads me to another question on the user side. How can individuals know their technology and if their relationship with their tech is healthy? Like, are there tools or exercises that our listeners can use to help them understand better?
Definitely. I always encourage folks to lean into any sort of native kind of OS level patterns that have been implemented that help users create boundaries. So an example is Apple in their latest iOS version, they really expanded on focus modes. It started with just do not disturb, where it was like you could turn this on and your phone wouldn't light up at all. And that was a great first step. And I think that what we're seeing now is big companies like Apple and Google are focusing more on digital well-being and expanding on certain things that, you know, they're giving users the option. Not everyone is going to use focus modes, but things like that and screen time are just helpful to get an understanding from a data perspective of how much time am I spending on my phone. And for some people, it's like okay, I'm spending 4 hours on Instagram. What do I do with this data? And there are tools to help you create boundaries, but I think it's just honestly a habit breaking kind of cycle that if you want to create a better boundary with tech in your own life, it has to start with breaking the habits of scrolling on your phone before bed. So maybe set those limits for yourself. Say, I'm going to spend 10 minutes and then I'm going to put my phone away, or I'm going to go for a walk. I always encourage folks to just find what works best for them, because I think that our phones should be an extension of who we are as human beings. And that's not how they're being used in full today.
Yeah, so that gets back to the question of control, right? Because you would need to have intentional control over that relationship in order to think, oh, 10 minutes is all that I need. It's all that makes me feel good. Beyond that, I don't feel good. So I need to put it down after 10 minutes, and I need to track 10 minutes. And that seems to be, I mean, there's definitely more people talking about that these days, but that seems to be really hard when these devices and experiences are, as you often talk about, engineered for addiction. What is a step that someone can take? And there may not be a good answer here, but what is a step that someone can take to start taking back control?
I think for me personally, what's been successful is disabling a lot of push notifications that are unnecessary to what I may be doing on a day-to-day basis. So I'm sure y'all can relate. Whenever you get a push notification, it's like hey, look at me, pay attention, open this app. And sometimes it's really beneficial. So I imagine folks that, you know, have children in daycare, they need to have their phone on. They need to be notified of anything like that. But there are some cases like, you know, Grubhub or Uber or DoorDash, where it's like promotions that are typically sent in the form of a push notification. Whereas I think the purpose of a push notification is to alert your user that something needs their attention. And
Right.
that's not the way that they're being used today. So I would say that's step one. That helped me create a lot of healthier boundaries because there wasn't the temptation there. And then secondly, I'll, you know, double tap on the focus modes. Love those. They have been a godsend in just allowing me to get into a flow state during the day. And even at night when I'm unwinding, I don't want to be bothered or notified. And so those have really allowed me to build in healthy boundaries for myself.
My phone is, when it's not in airplane mode, which is a lot of the time, it's always in do not disturb unless I'm expecting an important call or an Uber pickup. I find I hate all alerts. I disable a lot of them just as soon as they pop. But in general, I find that really helps my personal relationship with my phone, because otherwise it's like a nagging spouse, you know, like what do you be quiet already. I don't need to know this. So does this contribute to part of what you might what you do refer to? And when I say this, I'm talking about like the constant stream of notifications. Does that relate to what you refer to as an attention crisis? Can you talk about what that is?
Definitely. So I'm going to give a plug. I highly recommend everyone read Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. He did a deep dive into why we're in an attention crisis and what that actually means. And I was surprised to learn that it's not just because of technology. There are a lot of environmental factors that have contributed to this as well. But the section that he talked about the most, where he kind of did a deep dive on the technology front, was that across the board in any sort of software we're using, there's always this fight for something to get your attention. So an example is in Google, I use Google Chrome as a browser. I use Gmail for my email communications. There's a number that pops up in the tab window that tells me I have new email. And my brain is immediately signaled to, there's something new here. What is it? Like, who reached out to me? So it's a human nature thing to find something that is, I guess, for lack of a better term, dopamine inducing, because there is feelings of dopamine involved here whenever we see a notification or we were opening our email and we see new things in our feeds. So I'm going to pause. I think I went off on a tangent. What was your original question?
Oh man, what's competing for your attention? No.
The attention crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crisis,
I'm like,
yeah.
wait, I need to check my Gmail.
Yeah.
You're like, you start thinking about that number and you're like, I think I need to check it.
It's funny, and we'll leave it to Doug's team to sort out the editing on
Right,
this.
yeah.
Let's just continue the conversation. So I know what you're talking about in terms of the dopamine triggers tied to notifications and badges. What I find interesting, and I don't know, I don't think I'm the only one, and I don't know at a physiological level if this is tied to dopamine. But when I see badges, notification badges, to me that feels like a trigger for anxiety, not for joy. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that, Bethany?
Definitely. And unfortunately, the pattern badges originally were meant to alert users of things needing their immediate attention. And patterns like that have now kind of been manipulated to be used. Hey, if we know we can get users on our platform, if we ask them to turn on notifications or turn on badging or some other form of us contacting you, it's much easier to get the engagement number to come back at a higher rate, which equates to, a good business metric that they can point to. So it's things like that where I think the use of certain design patterns have been manipulated, and we're not really questioning the status quo anymore in terms of, is this what's best?
So, and that gets to something I wanted to ask you since you agreed to come on the show, which is, and I totally understand where your personal motivation comes from, and I love that you are reaching other creators, and I understand where their motivation might come from. But where does the business incentive come from? Where would the incentive come? Like you were saying, it's great for Twitter to have infinite scroll because people are going to spend 50% longer on there. Where does the incentive come for a company like Twitter to say, well, let's put some stop points in there, right? Because
that's a great question.
If businesses are going to do what makes money, absent regulatory pressure or consumer demand. That's my perspective. So, and you're devoting a lot of time and energy to this mission. Where do you think that the incentive will come from for companies, not just individuals, but for companies to be making these changes?
I'm going to take y'all like maybe 2 to 3 years down the road, and
Please.
what I hope will happen. I think that eventually my hope is that there will be some sort of guidelines that companies need to comply by in order to be deemed as ethical. And maybe that's not the right word, but are y'all familiar with the WCAG guidelines for
No.
accessibility?
No.
Okay. It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these were released probably 20 years ago, shortly after the internet kind of hit its boom. And these guidelines were built to help disabled users and people using screen readers and other assistive technologies so that they were able to use the products that people were building, because that wasn't always the case. So what that looks like from the design perspective now is we have a checklist per se that's, make sure your contrast meets a certain ratio so that, the text on a dark background like really stands out. things like keyboard tabbing that is really helpful for people using screen readers. Every single tech company pretty much should, and they will be sued if they are not complying by these guidelines. There was Wegmans, I think, got sued maybe 3 to 4 years ago by a person in Florida that was just unable to use their website because of the fact that they weren't meeting these guidelines. So I'm hesitant to use the word regulations because I think whenever people hear that term, it's like, oh, don't regulate my tech and things like that. But there has to be some guidelines in place. It's crazy to me that, the internet has existed for this long and there are not certain guidelines around protecting end users. And there are things like this that are starting to kind of come into practice. There is the Detour Act that has not yet been passed by the Senate, but it would basically outlaw dark patterns. So that's a great start. And I think going back to your question, it's really, really difficult to implement this change at an organization as large as Google and Apple and Facebook and Twitter and all of these tech giants. So my goal with Create with Conscience is let's start with the people on the ground and advocate for change from policymakers. And I think that there's going to be this blend eventually where those two can come together and there'll be a great marriage of there are regulations in place and guidelines we need to follow because we've all agreed to this as a company. And then at the creator level, we are no longer driving towards, and profiting off of this attention-based economy.
I love that. I love that. And I feel like you're really ahead of the game because these conversations are happening. We're talking about the damage that social media is doing to especially particularly young people. And it feels to me, I think your trajectory of a few years in the future, I feel like that's pretty accurate because we're at a point where, okay, we've talked about this, what can we do? And I feel like what you're doing now in your organization and your effort is the answer, it's the response to these issues. Because, honestly, I never really thought about on the design level, what could be done to kind of curb some of these behaviors. And I think there is a way to marry the business goal with the ethical approach. And I think it is going to take pressure from regulation and from users. Like this conversation isn't going away. It's only going to get more and more. It's only going to get worse, I think, because so many people are being harmed and we're talking about it now.
I agree with where the conversation ended up. Bethany, I totally understand why the word regulatory is maybe seen as, I don't even know the right word, but unpleasant by a lot of Americans in particular. I feel like these sorts of changes, and tech, by the way, being one of the least regulated industries that there is, because the history of tech has been such that you want it free, you want innovation, and in order to have the most innovation, you need the least regulation. But as you talked about in your video, the hearings, the congressional hearings where the Facebook, Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower testified, I think this all signifies a sort of a turning point, that it'll be a slow process. But what I was going to say is I feel like what we're seeing, based on how difficult it is to regulate things in the United States and how difficult it is in general to get anything passed at the federal level, that we are going to see this happen in Europe first, where we have seen much stronger digital privacy protections enabled. They have the right to be forgotten in multiple countries. They have the right to disconnect in multiple countries and soon throughout the entire EU, which is a topic we talked about in another episode. And so that's where I don't even consider myself an optimist, but if I were an optimist, I would be looking to Europe as the place where a lot of these issues are going to be resolved. And once companies have to start complying with laws in Europe, it's going to become easier to get them to comply with similar laws in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to go back to something you said, because I think it's really interesting, just diving deep into the fact that tech for the majority of the last 10 years has been innovate, build fast and break things. That's kind of a mentality that I've heard from the design side of things is, let's just iterate really quickly and get something out the door and try to move fast. And when you move fast, it doesn't make time to have the hard conversations. And
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't make space for proper research to vet your solutions. So what I think is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years is a gradual slowdown of what we're building, and a mentality of what we're putting out there in the world needs to be considered and needs to really be thought through, rather than just ship it.
Yeah,
well,
totally.
to move fast and break things, at some point you have to fix the things you've broken, because we're breaking some pretty big things. You know?
Yeah, they forgot that part in the Facebook slogan. Cool. So Bethany, we've talked about a lot, because we always like leaving listeners with a specific actionable tip. Now, I know we've covered a bunch of specific actionable tips in this conversation, and I know you have a lot more too. If possible, is there one specific piece of advice for our listeners for them to start finding a healthier balance with the technology in their lives?
Ooh, I can only choose one thing.
You can choose more.
You can break the rules. Yeah.
Ooh, I like this. I would say reflection's a big practice in my life, and it's helped me to take stock of what's working and what's not. And I think something that was kind of a wake-up call for me was just noticing and being present and watching other people be nose deep in their devices. And I'm not saying that phones are bad. I think that that's definitely the message I want to hit on, is that I don't think devices are bad. I do think it's the software that's, being built in these devices that doesn't have our best interests in mind. So just take stock of where you as an individual are with your own technology use. And that can mean, with your TV, with your laptop or monitor, with your own personal device. And just take stock of how you feel afterwards. Do you feel more relaxed after using this tech, or do you feel more on edge? Do you feel stressed out because you saw, something on Twitter or Instagram or social media that made you feel kind of nasty? And then figure out what's going to work for you to change that behavior if it is something that's affecting you in a negative way. I think a worry I have is that we're going to become so engrossed in these devices because they offer this immediate dopamine hit, that the world around us is becoming less exciting and the people around us are becoming less exciting. Yeah. So I am worried about the long-term effects. And I think it starts with just kind of reflecting on your own personal use and understanding what do you want your relationship to be with tech.
Right. Thank you for saying how you feel, because I think for myself, that's been a huge indicator of how I use my devices is, not accepting the status quo of, well, this is just something I do, but really asking myself, how does this make me feel? And is this affecting me negatively? Is this keeping me up all night? How is this technology or this habit that I've created? How is it helping or hindering? And if it's hindering, taking a look at that. So I appreciate you.
I think that was beautifully said. And then, the second part of that is, remembering that you, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, you remember that you are in control. So once you learn the lessons from your self-reflection, remember that you're actually in control of all of the things that are leading to those feelings that you're experiencing. And that, so you have the power to modify those behaviors and modify your relationship with the technology around you. And so, I thank you very much for that answer. That was beautiful. How would you like our listeners to learn more about you and Create with Conscience?
They can visit createwithconscience.com. And on there, I have a little bit of background on some of the things that I touched on here in terms of the attention crisis. And then the set of principles are also on there as well. So give those a read. I've included specific examples in there because I tend to find that having those and having a framework to work off of is really important. And then you can follow Create with Conscience on Twitter. I post all of the I know, right?
Yeah.
It has good things. Or good.
No,
things
I totally get it. We have social handles too. But it is funny. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I say that because I post about the conferences that I'm speaking at, and I'm at the point where I'm kind of revamping some of my original work that I did with Create with Conscience. So I'd like to share just daily reminders on there on like, hey, have you taken time away from your device today? So it's not just to a grab to get your attention.
No, cool. Well, Bethany, this has been a wonderful discussion. I am super happy to have stumbled on your work and that you decided to take the time to come join us here on the Healthier Tech podcast. Thank you so much.
I'm so honored to
Thank
be
you.
here. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in the show. Please like and subscribe to the Healthier Tech Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Get your free quick start guide to building a healthier relationship with technology and our latest information at healthiertech.co.